Welcome back to the homestead. We're here with our 2019 CF Moto Zforce 1000, and we're going to give you our 2-year review on it. We've now had this for 2 summer riding seasons. We're in Maine, so summer, spring, a little bit of fall is kind of our complete riding season. So we've put a little over 3,000 miles on this machine now. In total.
Yeah.
And Ryan's gonna go over a little bit of the maintenance that we've done on it and a few of the little issues that have come up. Really, so far it's been a very solid machine for us. We've had a lot of fun with it. If you've watched our 1-year 2,000 mile review, I think we're just as happy with it as we were then. It's really a great little machine. It's a lot of fun. I did get the opportunity to drive a friend's Can-Am a little while back, and there are some pretty notable differences. The Can-Am feels a lot more car-like and a lot less off-road buggy-like than this one does. It's got a lot more suspension and stuff to it. So if you're accustomed to a Can-Am, this is definitely going to be a really different feel. But each of them definitely has their own merits, and so far we've really loved this machine.
Yeah, and as Sue pointed out, here in Maine, we get frozen and snow in the winter, so the trails usually get turned over to snowmobiles in the winter. So for us, usually at the beginning of hunting season, all of our trails get shut down because all of our landowners want to be able to go out and go hunting without worrying about ATVs, which is usually, I think,
November.
Yeah, 1st of November, somewhere in that ballpark. And then in the spring, it usually boils down to how soon the frost comes out of the ground and how soon the ground dries up. But around mid-May, I'm going to say, generally is when our season starts. This year we were a little busier around the homestead, as you saw, so we only put about 1,000 miles on this thing this year instead of 2,000 like last year. But still, no issues, no mechanical things to deal with this year. We did our regular services. We adjusted the valves one more time, and we did oil changes. We will put a belt on this come spring. I don't really know the exact mileage. It's kind of one of those Ford versus Chevy debates when you hear people talk about it. I got a couple friends that are mechanics on these things, and they say around 3,000 miles it doesn't hurt to put a belt on it. I think that we're a little easier on our belt than some are, but actually we may be harder on your belt. So you see the kids that are always spinning and tearing around and everything. The clutches actually like that better, because when you drive like old people like I do, when you take off easy, that clutch slips on the belt, and every time you do that, you wear a little bit on the belt. And if you ever smell the belt, you really have actually burned some belt in a couple spots. And last year we were playing around in the snow, and you could smell the belt pretty bad. And then this year we had a friend who, first time he ever drove one, we got in a big rock hill thing, and I forgot to tell him to put it in low range. And you could smell the belt a little bit there. So I think we're gonna put a belt on it next spring. It's about $300 to buy the CF Moto belt, and about $100 and something to buy a different brand, not CF Moto. So we'll probably go with the CF Moto just to know that we don't have any issues. And then we'll evaluate this belt and keep it as a spare. Other than that, we didn't add anything new to it this year. Everything was added last year.
We were supposed to do seat belts on it this last year, because probably our biggest complaint actually with this machine is that these seat belts suck. They lock up at weird times, and they're just not very good. They're poorly designed. There's a little plastic piece in there that breaks. Ryan's side is actually missing that because we had to take it apart because his seatbelt completely locked up to the point where you couldn't get it to come over and across.
Yeah, so the seat belts, there's a mechanism in there, and I didn't bring you guys along for that, and I should have. When we change them over next spring, we'll tear one apart. But there's 2 reasons the seat belt will lock up. One is from inertia. So if you grab your seat belt and go just as quick, snap it as fast as you can, it'll lock. And that's like if you hit something, like we hit a tree, and our body starts to go forward, that seat belt will lock. All that mechanism is still in there. But then there's this little plastic piece where it's a weighted ball and a little plastic arm. And if you roll the machine over, the ball pushes the plastic piece and catches the dog and locks the seatbelt. So if you are in a very slow speed rollover your seatbelt, my seatbelt, is not going to catch now because that's broken. The problem with that is that's the piece, and a little dirt and stuff gets up in there, and that ball bounces around when you're driving down the trail. And that was what was actually causing mine. We were, I don't know, probably an hour away from home, and my seatbelt just physically would not come out. It was locked. You could beat on it, you could tap on it. We tried everything. We finally just gave up on it. When we got home, we tore it apart and found that ball and all that mud in there. So we do have a set of harnesses that we intend on putting into it. We just haven't got to that yet. That will be a spring project as well. But I don't think that's necessarily a CF Moto fault. I think one of the issues that may be a CF Moto quirk, if you will, is there's a lot of hole down through to the ground around the seat belts on both sides. And I think that a guy could take some rubber, maybe inner tube or mud flap or something, and make something that goes down in there and plugs that hole. The seatbelt mechanism is above that hole, but they leave the hole where it bolts to the frame, and they just didn't fill it in with plastic. And I think that's one of the problems. And I do want to plug those holes myself, because especially on the driver's side, when you go through a puddle, some of that will splash up and get you in the driver's side rear end, and you'll get wet from that because it'll come up through the gap in the seats. So,
and it looks like he pooped himself.
So that's one of those things that I don't necessarily think this is a design flaw in any way whatsoever. I think that anytime you take an automotive style seatbelt and put it out into a mud, water, rich environment, and you've got these things, underwater and everything else, I think you're just asking for trouble. So that's my opinion on that.
And you can see we found a little mud with this. It's due for a little cleanup before it gets its final put away for the season, but definitely it gets dirty.
Yeah.
So it's a rough environment for all of the components of it, really, but it seems to hold up and take it pretty well.
And you saw in the review video from last year at 2,000 miles, I showed you just a little bit of movement in the front A-arm, and I told you I was going to weld a washer in there and take that movement out of it. I actually just kept an eye on it this year because I wanted to see did it get a lot worse, and it hasn't changed. It's still the same very minute amount of movement. My mind is actually telling me that maybe the tolerances in China when they drill these holes out for the frame, maybe that one was just drilled a little large. Maybe it isn't actually moving, because if it's not getting worse, it's probably not wearing. So we're going to keep an eye on that, and then probably mid-season next year we'll go ahead and we'll fix that up. We may actually invest in a set of shocks and springs, because as Sue said, it rides pretty good. It rides like an ATV, but there are some aftermarket shocks and springs that really kind of soften it up and let you really dial it in. We haven't quite been able to get the back of this thing not to slam you in the back when, like, say you're going down the rail bed and there's a big not a wash, but a pothole type thing that's sharp in and sharp out. When the machine hits that, it kind of, when you come out of it, it kind of jars you back up in the seat. And I haven't really been able to soften that rear suspension up to absorb that just yet. And to be fair, I haven't really tried real hard, but I guess it's one thing that I could say maybe I can see where there is a little bit of room for improvement on these things is in the suspension. But again, I don't want to critique CF Moto because we haven't spent days, playing with that and really trying. Like, we haven't loosened up the springs to see if we can take some preload off them. There's a lot of things we could still do yet, and we may do next spring, just to try to really dial that in and see if we can become very happy with it. Other than that, riding wise, it seems to handle rocks, everything else. The suspension seems really well. It's that one thing where when you hit that bump at like 30 miles an hour, when you hit that sharp edge coming back out of that hole, it just kind of...
It jars you up a little bit. But overall, it's been great. It's been very reliable. We've had no issues with it starting. It has a little bit of a slow start when it's cold, but that's kind of expected for the type of vehicle that it is.
Well, that's pretty common if you read a lot of the message boards. The CF Motos, it's something to do with the fuel mapping when it's cold, the computer and the fuel injection. You might have to try to start it 3, 4, 5 times before it stays running. And I suspect that pretty quickly you'll start, and it may already be there, I haven't found it, but I suspect you'll start to see a lot of custom tunes for these where you can have your computer flashed and get a little better performance and stuff. But power-wise, we're no problem at all. We've never wanted for more power, but we also don't hot rod around or really go looking for deep mud just to see how,
Just that one time.
Yeah, I mean, we find it on occasion, but we're more out there just to kind of have a slow, leisurely ride. We don't abuse the machine. We're not jumping over things. We're not slamming into things. So it has a pretty easy life with us, to be fair. But all in all, we're actually very happy with our investment. If we could have found a used Can-Am at the time we were looking, we probably would have ended up buying that, not knowing. But now looking back, we're actually pretty happy that we got the new machine, because we didn't have any of those quirks or worries of a used machine. We get to kind of, break it in our way, and we know how it's been treated and so on. So I think we're kind of where we were last year. I mean, in my opinion anyways, if we were to do it again.
Good value for the price, and it's been a good machine for us. We've had a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, I mean, no regrets on the 60-inch wide.
No, and no regrets on the 1000, even though we only did that because I wanted orange.
Yeah, I mean, that's the only thing I could say different maybe is if they had the 800 in orange, we might have got it. But at the end of the day, the 1000 really fit our bill. They do have this model, this Zforce 1000 model was only made, I think, for 2 years, maybe 3. And they've come out now with what they call like a Sport 950, I believe, which is a little lower, longer. That's actually kind of appealing looking. I think that might actually ride a little better. I don't know. But that's an interesting one too if you're in the market for a new machine and this brand is something of interest to you. We'll leave a link either here or here at the end of the video to our first year review, because we're probably missing a lot of the little tidbits. But at the end of the day, if this is your first jump into a side-by-side, if you've never owned a ATV before or you never owned a side-by-side before, definitely 50 versus 60 inches, in my opinion, is a no-brainer, unless there's an absolute reason you can't go to 60.
It's much more stable.
Rides a lot better.
Rides better.
Yeah.
We do have a friend that has a 50-inch Can-Am, and you can definitely see on the trails that he has a lot more tipping issue. In fact, he actually rolled over on one of our adventures.
Yeah.
He wasn't injured. Everything was fine. We were able to put it back upright, and we continued on our trip. But definitely the 50-inch is much less stable. And I think depending on the area that you're in around here, there's a lot more of these 60-inch wide machines. And so he has kind of the issue where if there's rutting or anything, he ends up having to side up on one of the ruts.
Yeah.
And that can cause some
it's just, it's all
additional.
It's all geometry, I suppose, and the wider it is, the more stable it is. Around here in the state of Maine, there used to not be a width limit on a side-by-side, but we were limited to 2,000 pounds. So this year, or 2022, I guess next season, there is a limit of, I believe, 65 inches or 64?
65 inches.
65 inches. We do have this interesting clause where if you actually were able to purchase one last year when they first came out, wider than 65, and get it registered last year before the 1st of October, I think it was, you're grandfathered in as long as you don't let the registration expire. But as an interesting side effect of that is the trail master for our local club, one of the things we've had to do is go see all of our landowners, get all new permission slips for them because now signed, because now we have to actually get the landowner to agree to the oversized machine. So
so you could, up in this area, be excluded from riding actually with a wider machine on several of the trails, and actually they can limit it all the way down to 60 inches. So knowing where you're going and being aware of those rules and limitations is really important with some of the new stuff that's coming up and some of the things they're doing to try and keep landowners happy and keep it so that we have the ability to do the recreation that we love.
Yeah. So, I mean, at the end of the day, again, very happy with it. No issues at all this summer. No mechanical work on it this summer at all, except for just routine maintenance and checking that A-arm that we showed you last year. The winch still works great. Still really happy with the tires. Transmission works fine. No issues there. Just all in all, even the things like the Super ATV windshield that we've actually, had to squeegee scrape mud and stuff off when we're out traveling. Just got a few light scratches in it, and my general thought on that is on a plastic windshield, if I can get a couple of years out of it before I either got to polish it or replace it, I'm probably in pretty good shape. I can't fault a plastic windshield for having a few little scratch marks in it when I'm cleaning mud off it on the trail.
And we're still really happy we went with the decision to put the lower doors on here. That has made a huge difference for us, as far as a lot of the time that we ride is in mud. It's a mud season. Maine is
Or
damp.
cold, you know.
And
Yep.
these doors make a huge difference both in keeping you dry, because with the way the half doors are designed, your whole leg kind of gets soaked when you go through puddles,
And the dust rolls right in.
and the dust rolls
Because
right
of the way the
in.
air
So
flows.
these have been a huge advantage both in the dusty season and in the wet season. The only downside to them is you don't get near as much airflow. So with the fact that the cab can get pretty warm from the engine heat, in the summer that's a little bit of a downside, because if it's 100 degrees out and you've got the cab heating up, you definitely do notice it, and that might be a great time to take these doors off. We left them on all season. We don't get a lot of weather that hot, but if you were in an area where you did,
Yeah.
those doors might be a bit of a detriment. But if you're in mud, they're absolutely a necessity.
And you could take the whole door off too. Like if you didn't want to take the panel off, you could actually pop the pin out of the door and take the whole door off. You know, you do have seat belts, so it's totally up to you how you deal with that. Knocking all the mud off in it. So I think we could ramble forever on this thing, but it sure is a lot of fun. We really enjoy it. We enjoy getting out into nature and seeing the sights and seeing the trails and going new places, riding with friends, that kind of thing. It's just always a good time. And yeah, to wrap it up, like I say, as of right now, no mechanical issues, nothing showing up, no amounts of metal in the any of the oils. As you see in our maintenance videos, we change the differential oils every time we change the engine oil, and that's not necessarily recommended by CF Moto, but it's just so cheap to do. I mean, you know, I think we use 2 quarts of gear oil every time we do that to change the transmission and the front and rear end. And it lets us get a visual. We pull that drain plug out and look at the magnet and see just how much stuff is on there. You know, are we seeing a problem coming down the road? And we're just not seeing any issues there. Everything's, you know, everything's working as it was. The brakes are still really good on it. We checked the brake pads. No real wear to speak of there. So, yeah, I think.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and hopefully we'll see you out there on the trails.